Picture a satellite image, not the kind that makes headlines. No tank columns, no burning cities, no dramatic craters. Just a flat stretch of Russian forest in Smolensk Oblast, 46 kilometers from the Belarusian border, where something strange has been growing in the tree line since early 2025. Rows of low, uniform structures, a road that goes nowhere a civilian would need to go, and if you zoom in close enough, the unmistakable silhouette of launch rails pointing west. Nobody announced this. No press release, no ministry statement, no geopolitical summit convened to discuss it. It simply appeared, the way dangerous things tend to appear in this war, quietly, methodically, hidden in plain sight, on publicly available satellite imagery that most of the world wasn't looking at. The question isn't what it is, the question is what it's for. What it's for is a strategic geometry problem that Russia has been quietly solving for 18 months. Ukraine's air defenses, formidable as they've become, are concentrated where the war has always been, in the east, along the Kyiv corridor, defending the cities the cameras are pointed at. Western Ukraine, the oblasts bordering Poland, the highways and rail lines that carry NATO weapons from Warsaw to the front, those are harder to hit from eastern Russia. The flight path is long, the drones pre-programmed, the targeting imprecise. But what if you could move the launch point? What if you could slip your drone fleet through a back door, shorten the flight to minutes, and hand a human operator real-time control over a weapon that can now track a moving truck, find a locomotive, and follow it into a station? That changes everything. That's what these 5 bases are about. Today is June 15th, 2026. In the last 72 hours, the picture has sharpened considerably. The Institute for the Study of War published its priority assessment on June 12th, stating explicitly that Russia is building at least 5 long-range drone launch sites in western Russia, close to the border with Belarus, likely to support drone strikes against Ukraine, possibly by exploiting Belarusian airspace. This isn't speculation from a Telegram channel. This is the West's most widely cited open-source conflict monitor, using the word likely with the kind of careful precision that in ISW language means the evidence is substantial. And the satellite imagery that underpins that assessment has been accumulating for months, piece by piece, base by base. This is Professor Jiang. If you find this kind of analysis useful, the economics, the logistics, the war underneath the war, then subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel continue the work. Now let's follow the money. Or in this case, follow the launchers. 5 sites. Let's name them, because geography matters enormously here. Tsymbulova Airfield, in Smolensk Oblast, 46 kilometers from the Belarusian border. The closest of the 5. About 10 launchers visible in May satellite imagery, with jet-powered geranium traces detected as early as March 2026. Tsymbulova, in Orel Oblast, 200 kilometers from Belarus. This one is different in scale entirely, and we'll come back to it. Navlia, in Bryansk Oblast, 127 kilometers from the border, operational since fall 2024 with 3 launch pads and 16 storage shelters. Asalvitsa, also in Bryansk, 163 kilometers out, also operational since fall 2024. And Seshcha, also Bryansk Oblast, 45 kilometers from Belarus, a former major Shahed hub that Ukraine struck in May 2023 and that analysts believed was dormant. Satellite imagery from June 4th of this year shows construction has resumed. That last one deserves a pause. Russia struck a facility, Ukraine retaliated, the facility went quiet, everyone moved on, and then 3 years later, Russia simply rebuilt it. That's a pattern worth internalizing. This war has a way of making things that looked finished look very unfinished. But Tsymbulova is the one that stops analysts cold. Russian state television's Zvezda has called it the largest drone port in the world, which is the kind of boast you'd normally dismiss as propaganda, except that the satellite evidence doesn't really contradict it. As of June 1st imagery obtained by RFE/RL's Belarusian service Svoboda, the facility measures nearly 2 by 4 kilometers. It contains at least 93 garages, 15 large hangars, a 2.5 kilometer launch road. Analysts estimate it can store more than 500 drones simultaneously, with at least 175 visible in shelters on any given image. It doubled in footprint between spring and early summer 2026. In less than 1 month before May 20th, satellite imagery showed Russia adding 10 more launchers, 4 near existing pads, 6 in the southern section. Ukraine struck it in January 2025 and confirmed hits. It kept growing anyway. Now here is where the economics get genuinely alarming. The new launchers at Tsymbulova, those elongated 80-meter rail installations, aren't for the Garin 2, the propeller-driven Shahed variant that Ukraine's air defenses have learned to intercept at a 92% rate. Those rails are for the Garin 5, jet-powered, a turbojet engine sourced from a Chinese company called Telefly. Estimated speed, 500 to 600 kilometers per hour, roughly 3 times faster than its predecessor. Tsymbulova and a site in occupied Donetsk are currently the only 2 confirmed Garin 5 launch locations on the planet. Ukraine intercepted 92% of approximately 7,800 drones in March 2026. Of 12 ballistic missiles launched in the same month, Ukraine intercepted 0. The Garin 5 sits somewhere between those two categories in terms of defensive difficulty and the infrastructure to mass produce and mass launch. It is being built right now 46 to 200 kilometers from the Belarusian border. The reason the Belarusian border matters, the reason these aren't just any 5 bases built in any 5 locations in Russia, comes down to a concept that military analysts call FPV range, first-person view. When a drone is pre-programmed and flies autonomously, it can hit a building, a power station, a fixed target. But when a human operator sits somewhere with a headset and a controller and flies the drone in real time watching through its camera, they can do something qualitatively different. They can track moving objects, a truck on a highway, a train pulling into a station. From eastern Russia, maintaining that FPV signal link over the distance to western Ukraine is difficult or impossible. From Belarusian airspace, the geometry changes entirely. We know this isn't theoretical because Russia already ran the proof of concept. On December 22, 2025, a Shahed drone, guided in real time by a Russian operator based in Belarus, derailed a freight train near Korostan in Zhytomyr Oblast, 50 kilometers south of the Belarusian border. 4 railway workers were injured. 4 days later, a second strike hit Kovel railway station in Volyn Oblast, damaging a locomotive, a freight car, and a repair depot. Electronic warfare expert Sergei Beskresnov confirmed both operators were in Belarus, using FPV control to guide the drones onto moving targets. This wasn't a stray drone. This was a template launched from Russia, guided from Belarus, aimed at the rail infrastructure of western Ukraine. And ISW named the template explicitly. In its May 26th assessment, the institute stated that launching drones from Belarusian soil would allow Russian forces to use remotely controlled Shahed and Molniya drones, which would increase accuracy and the ability to hit moving targets along Ukrainian ground lines of communication. Ground lines of communication is military language for supply routes. And there are 2 supply routes in western Ukraine that matter more than any others: the M06 Kyiv-Chop highway and the rail line connecting Poland to Ukraine. These are the arteries through which NATO weapons, ammunition, and humanitarian aid flow from Warsaw to the front. If Russia can put an FPV-capable drone over those roads with an operator in Belarus watching in real time, that changes the calculus of Western resupply in ways that no air defense system in Kyiv can easily address. I want to be honest with you about what I don't know here, because this story has real uncertainties, and anyone selling you certainty is lying. Russia has not confirmed that it has launched drones from Belarusian soil at scale. The December 2025 strikes established that operators can guide drones from Belarus, but the drones themselves were launched from Russian territory. ISW's June 12th assessment talks about likely future exploitation of Belarusian airspace, not confirmed current exploitation. There is a difference. What Belarus has officially admitted to, over 1,400 airspace violations by unspecified drones in 2025 alone, 520 drones neutralized on Belarusian territory, including roughly 1/3 classified as combat drones, is itself remarkable. But Minsk has not publicly stated those are Russian drones. The official position is studied ambiguity, which is politically useful for Lukashenko precisely because it allows him to remain a passive participant rather than a formal co-belligerent. ISW has also assessed, as recently as late May 2026, that a Belarusian ground invasion remains very unlikely. There is no buildup of Belarusian forces on the border sufficient for a land offensive. The threat here is atmospheric and informational, not terrestrial. It is drone corridors and signal relays and plausible deniability, not tank columns. And Ukraine's interception capabilities are genuinely formidable against the current drone generation. 92% in March 2026. That's real. The vulnerability isn't today's Drone 2. The vulnerability is tomorrow's Garin 5 and the Oreshnik and the combination of infrastructure that Russia is building right now. Which brings us to the other layer of this story, because above the drone bases, in the escalation architecture Russia is assembling near Belarus, sits something that belongs in a different category entirely. On December 30th, 2025, Russia's Ministry of Defense declared an Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missile unit in Belarus on combat duty. Analysts at the Middlebury Institute identified the likely site as Krychev 6, a former airfield in Mogilev Oblast in eastern Belarus, 4 to 5 kilometers from the Russian border, approximately 160 kilometers from Ukraine. 6 vehicles matching Oreshnik support equipment were visible in Planet Labs imagery by February 9th. Flight time to Warsaw from Krychev 6, approximately 3 minutes. Flight time to Kyiv, under 2 minutes. And in March 2026, when Russia launched 12 ballistic missiles at Ukraine, 0 were intercepted. The connection to Belarus's civilian economy is also not incidental. Ukraine's sanctions decree of February 18, 2026, the document in which Zelensky formally imposed personal sanctions on Lukashenko, identified more than 3,000 Belarusian enterprises as actively supplying Russia with machinery, equipment, and components critical to the war effort, including parts relevant to Oreshnik production. Belarus isn't just lending Russia its airspace. Its industrial sector is threaded into the supply chain that produces the weapons flying through it. Russia's response to exposure has been instructive. In the second half of 2025, as Zelensky stated in February 2026, Russia had deployed a network of signal repeaters on Belarusian rooftops, routing Shahed control signals through civilian cell towers to reach operators guiding drones toward Kyiv, Rivne, and Volyn. Ukrainian hackers exposed that network in February. By May 2nd, Russia had adapted airborne signal relay balloons drifting from Belarus into Ukrainian airspace, carrying the relay function aloft where it couldn't be dismantled from the ground. When one channel is closed, Russia opens another. The pattern is consistent and should be taken seriously. The public exchanges have grown pointed in ways that don't feel like theater. On May 26th, Robert Brovdy, the commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, issued a public warning to Lukashenko. He stated that 500 targets in Belarus had been identified and were part of active operational planning. His language was direct. The first 500 targets are already on the pencil. Lukashenko's response 5 days later was equally blunt. They may have identified 500 targets, but we have one very serious target with precise coordinates, far from Belarus. Both men said the quiet part loud. Neither flinched. The ISW read that exchange as Russia creating information conditions for the further use of Belarus for strikes on strategically important objects in western Ukraine's rear, manufacturing the pretext by inflating the drone violation count, preparing the justification for escalation. Both things can be true simultaneously. Belarus can be a reluctant instrument, a country whose leader has surrendered sovereignty by increments and now cannot easily refuse what Russia asks. And also a genuine strategic asset that Russia is exploiting with increasing boldness. Lukashenko's ambiguity protects him domestically, but ambiguity has a cost. It means he cannot publicly object when Russia installs drone launchers 46 kilometers from his border, or parks Oreshnik missiles in Mogilev Oblast, or runs signal relays through his civilian cell towers. The fiction of non-belligerency is maintained at the price of actual control. Now loop this back to your own life for a moment, because this isn't just a conflict in Eastern Europe. The M06 highway and the Poland-Ukraine rail link aren't abstractions. They are the physical infrastructure through which Western military and humanitarian assistance moves. If Russian FPV drones guided from Belarusian airspace begin reliably destroying locomotives and trucks on those routes, the cost of that resupply goes up in equipment, in insurance, in rerouting, in political will. Higher costs of conflict transmission eventually become higher costs of everything that passes through Eastern Europe's logistics networks. The war underneath the war has a way of becoming the war inside your economy, slowly and without announcement. Here is what the evidence does show. Russia has built at least 5 drone launch facilities in western Russia near the Belarusian border, with the closest 46 kilometers from that border. The Tsymbulova complex alone has the infrastructure to store and launch hundreds of drones, including a new jet-powered variant that travels at speeds making current interception methods significantly less reliable. Russia has already demonstrated the Belarus-guided FPV template in operational strikes on Ukrainian rail infrastructure. The Oreshnik IRBM is declared on combat duty in Belarus, and Russia is replacing each countermeasure Ukraine deploys, the signal relay network, the FPV corridor, with something new, faster, harder to dismantle. Here is what the evidence does not show. Confirmed large-scale drone launches from Belarusian soil, confirmed Oreshnik nuclear warhead storage at Kyiv 6, confirmed Belarusian government consent to active launch operations as opposed to passive tolerance, or any confirmed capability by Ukraine to close this corridor with available resources. The 5 bases are real. The strategic logic connecting them is coherent and documented. What happens next, whether Lukashenko's studied ambiguity holds, whether Ukraine's interception rates scale to meet the Geron 5, whether the NATO supply lines survive what ISW is describing as a nascent precision targeting strategy that remains genuinely open, which leaves you with a question worth sitting with. In a war defined by information warfare and manufactured pretext, when does a country cross the line from hosting to participating? Belarus has lent its rooftops, its airspace, its industrial supply chains, and now possibly its soil to a war it officially hasn't joined. The drones fly, the trains derail, the launchers multiply in the forest, and Minsk neither confirms nor refuses. At what point does the distinction between passive and active cease to mean anything at all? This is Prophet Jang. I'll see you in the next one.